Welcome, everybody, to the first webinar in the COVID-19 Ask the Experts webinar series. I am Stacy Skalski. I am NASP Director of Professional Policy and Practice, and I will be your moderator today. Just to let you know, our webinar today is called When One Door Closes and Another Opens, School Psychs Providing Telehealth Services. So in many of your cases, we are looking at telehealth services happening in the schools right now. And so NASP decided that we needed to try and help you out as best as we can by providing a webinar series that will address some of the key features that you need to know in order to do this. The series will be recorded this month and posted to the NASP website. All webinars will be publicly available. However, if you would like to engage in an ongoing discussion with your peers, you will need to be a NASP member. We will be posting a discussion thread to the NASP member exchange community, and we welcome all of you to participate in that discussion and share your knowledge and your experiences with one another. Each webinar will address critical questions emerging as a result of the need to provide telehealth services in schools, and they will provide advice and guidance from experts in our field and also external stakeholder experts, and we will also offer suggested strategies and resources to help you as you navigate these roads together. So today, we have an expert panel with four fantastic school psychologists. We have Dan Florell, who is an associate professor of psychology at Eastern Kentucky University, and he runs a private practice. His research interests are in cyberbullying, telehealth, adolescence, and using technology to enhance school psychologist practice. He is NASP's online communication coordinator, historian, and he writes the Just a Click Away column for the Communique. Secondly, we have Carrie Oyen. She is an assistant professor of school psychology for the University of South Dakota. Prior to her appointment there, she was a practicing rural school psychologist for 10 years. Carrie is a state coordinator for the Multi-Tiered Systems of Support Positive Behavior Interventions and Support Project in the state of South Dakota. Carrie's research focuses on risk and protective factors that lead to student outcomes, as well as the role of advocacy in public service settings. Carrie is also NASP's co-chair of the Government Professional Relations Committee. Thirdly, we have Stephanie Taylor. Stephanie started in education as a high school English and special ed teacher before becoming a school psychologist. And as a school psychologist, she has worked in urban and rural settings with a wide variance in student demographic and needs. She was also Idaho's first state school psychology consultant and was able to support districts in implementing school-wide systems. Stephanie has worked for the last 5 years as the clinical director of psych ed services at Presence Learning, where she launched their remote school psychology services, including counseling, assessment, consultation, and support. And lastly, we have Hiro Vicaria. Hiro is the coordinating Early Intervention Services lead psychologist with the Wake County Public School System in North Carolina. While Hiro currently lives in Maryland, she provides remote contractual services to Wake County, supporting their multi-tiered systems of support process. Hiro's experience includes working with several school districts on systems level change and establishing MTSS structures at the school and administrative level. Hiro is also the chair of NASP's Leadership Development Committee. So I just thank everybody for coming today and joining in this webinar, and I appreciate all the time of our experts. So let's begin. Right now, we know that it is very likely that school psychologists are being called in their local communities to provide telehealth services as their buildings are closed. We need to figure out where to begin. So what should that virtual environment look like? And maybe Dan and Stephanie can take a stab at this for us.
Well, thanks, Stacy. I think first we need to really look at what we need to have for effective service delivery. And I think you got to start off with just your own technological competence and willingness to learn and embrace the technology that's involved when we talk about doing telehealth. And that's going to be kind of a lot of things that school psychology are already comfortable with. But then there's also the factor of trying to show up on video and look like you would normally look and not look like me, where you're dodging off the eyes because I have multiple screens I'm staring at and things like that. Minimally, you're going to want a computer with a connection that's going to allow audio and video. Most of the time, people, when they refer to telehealth, they're referring to audio-video connections, though it can be broader than that. If you want a real rough kind of estimate, if you can go ahead and engage that from whatever setting you're in, I would say, can you stream a show on YouTube or on the device that you want to be using? And if the answer is yes, you can probably support it. If you want to get more technical, you want about a 5 megabyte per second upload and download speed, but you really want to kind of get more into the 10 megabyte upload and download speed, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. And then you also want to always try to have a backup communication like phone access, because we all know that videos tend to fail. And especially under these circumstances, they fail fairly frequently because it's got such a load on it. So you want to have that phone access to be able to continue anything that's interrupted. And then you really want to look at what tasks are achievable via telehealth. We can't simply just do everything that we've done before in the same manner. So doing things like counseling, having meetings, doing consultation, even working on interventions is very feasible through telehealth. Doing assessments is going to be a little trickier because the setups that are involved to be able to do an assessment to the level of reliability and validity that we would expect. So Stephanie, do you have anything to chime in on that one?
I do, thank you. And another thing to add, case in point, different platforms require different amounts of bandwidth. As you can see, I do not have my camera on today. That is because depending on the platform, and that's something you should be considering when you're looking at what you would use for your telehealth, consider the bandwidth of those different platforms and if they can support audio and video. One technique that can be utilized, however, is most platforms have a call-in option to them as well. And a lot of times you can strengthen the feed of your video by doing the audio through the phone, and they still appear synced in the platform or whatever you're using. So keep that in mind as well. But I do want to second on to what Dan said about really thinking about not only your environment, but which services you're going to engage in very deliberately, and thinking about not just trying to say, is it as good as it would be in person? I don't know if that's the correct comparison in this time. It's more, is it valid, and can I be sure that it is getting me the results that I want, regardless of what I might have done in person.
So I want to just do one little follow-up question for that. Stephanie, could you talk a little bit about the importance of the environment that the kids have when we're involved in this? Is there any considerations that you can give to what we should be talking to our students about in terms of their receiving end?
Absolutely. On the student end, they need the same essential setup and the same internet connectivity that Dan already mentioned that you're going to need on your end, depending on what you're going to use. They're also, the thing that I love about kids these days is they are very adept at online interactions, and they take direction very well. So really talking to them about what is in your line of sight? What are some of the things we can move to minimize distractions? What are, would it help to wear a set of headphones? Does that help you stay focused on the activities that we're working on? As well as their desktop area. So finding a specific place in their home. Laptops are so portable, of course, that really having somewhere consistent that becomes their place to connect with you is also very advantageous.
Oh, great. Okay, let's take another question. So now we know what our environment should look like. How should school psychs determine and respond to student needs? Let's see, Stephanie and Carrie, could you tackle that one for us, please?
Sure, I can start us off. Stephanie again. I think the first thing that we really need to look at is um, generally, what does the student need? And again, what are the things that can be done similarly to on-site services? And what are the things that now that there is an opportunity to connect differently, that you can be creative and change the way that you are interacting with that student? So my suggestion to start off with is to start everything with as much video as possible, as much video connectivity, really looking at the student and their environment and asking them what their situation is right now. What are they going through? What are they experiencing? Looking at the addressing them as a team. And this also goes back to the team itself. So not just connecting with the student, but really connecting with your school team. It's going to be important that all decisions that are made are done in the same team and collaborative focus as you would with any of your school decisions. And so to really be setting a cadence of which you're going to connect with your school team during this time where everyone is dispersed is going to sort of be the anchor and set the stage for what you work on going forward. And up front, you're going to need to do a lot of connection with that team, a lot of making plans for each individual student and what they've been working on, what their needs are, as well as documenting and keeping track. I highly recommend keeping email folders, for example, on the different conversations you have with the different stakeholders and really being able to refer back to communications later. Also keeping a lot of documentation, just learn your own filing system for good notes, because I find that when I am home and don't have my office, that it's much different, and the way that I organize my conversations and what I'm working on for each student definitely varies. I would also say that whatever steps you do take to determine the needs, this is a really great time to also look at what other services you could be providing. So not just assessing what the student has been receiving and how you would continue to do those services and what that needs to look like, but also looking more holistically at what new challenges does this kind of stressful time bring for the student, and are there opportunities for you as a school psychologist to engage in more areas of the practice model than you maybe have been able to prior. And by showing that the students are having these needs, and by having this opportunity to have some of the focus shift from things that became your day-to-day on the school setting, to be able to advocate and to try to make room for services for the students and what they're going through right now is a really good thing to be able to do. Carrie?
Yeah, well, and again, I appreciate this commentary. I think that, again, he's practicing school psychologist in South Dakota for 10 years prior to my entry into academia. And, you know, often how do we ensure that a child can have access to services, whether they're sitting in our more populous Sioux Falls, South Dakota, or sitting in South Dakota, for example, where it's 200 miles for you to have access to a mental health appointment, for example. And I think really thinking about how we identify and respond, I do think that it requires quite a bit of collaborative time. So not only setting up this environment where we are figuring out what our virtual kind of office looks like, but also think about how we practice with colleagues, and we're ensuring that we're identifying students and we're kind of sharing the load. So what does that mean? That means that, you know, if we're looking at kids that really have kind of a tier 3 or special education need for, you know, direct services, you know, how do we make sure that we are kind of splitting that out to the adults that perhaps the student might be closest to? So we're not like over emailing or over meeting with students, but we're also not missing anybody either. The other thing I think it's really important for us to consider is that when we do take a look at some of the telehealth trainings that are out there, for you to be able to really set up a telehealth practice, it takes something like 50 to 100 hours. And so I think it's really critical for us to know that in this environment, we really are kind of responding to more of an emergent need, and that's okay. I think we also have to give ourselves a break in that we're learning to navigate video systems and lighting and bandwidth and what's the best modality to communicate with kids. And I think that that's going to be really important as we move forward. The other thing I think it's really important for us to think about when we are connecting with families that maybe are more rural in nature. We know that, in rural environments, sometimes isolation, we might have maybe even like the presence of mental health services might be interpreted differently. And so we just want to be really mindful about that, about how we ourselves as professionals are kind of entering into the students and kind of seeing how not only our environment as our office, quote unquote, but then how that works as we're coming into their environments. We don't know how private their environments are. We don't know if they're hearing the things that we're saying, if other people in other rooms are hearing things. So again, I think that that's really important for us to keep in mind. And then the other thing I always keep in the back of my mind is that when it comes to rural environments, we always want to think about risk versus benefit. And I think in this emergent time, we know that there could be significant benefit from providing some virtual telehealth kind of services. And so we don't need to be afraid to give it a try. We just want to be mindful of some of the things that might be important as we're considering who needs those services.
Great. All that's excellent to consider. Let's talk a little bit, if we can, to what some of the specific services might be that should be provided, and thinking a little bit about systems level services as well as direct services to students. So maybe if Hero and Stephanie can tackle that, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on it.
Sure. I'm going to talk a little bit about indirect services that I've been involved in providing with a district level view on the structures around multi-tier systems of support. What I would encourage folks, even if you're at the school level, to engage in your problem solving meetings, your data team meetings, where you've been wanting to solve some database problems that you have at your school or make some database decisions around students, whether it's intervention decisions or referral decisions. These meetings can be conducted really well virtually. A lot of my job is supporting different MTSS structures that we have in our schools, but I do it at the central office level. So collaborating and consulting with other departments is part of what I do, but I would encourage us as school psychologists to use this time and collaborate with our teachers and our staff members to talk about different initiatives and get to that principal that really needs to be convinced that interventions work and MTSS works. Share research in whatever capacity whatever tools your district has provided to utilize for video conferencing. The one thing that I wanted to touch on too was, if you're at the district level and you're working to share information with fellow school psychologists or other stakeholders, one thing to consider might be, how can you develop some online professional learning for some key topics? Is there a place that you can house that for the future? Is this an opportunity to provide a type of training that you've been wanting to give but has not been possible in person? And lastly, when we're thinking about how you're conducting your meetings virtually, and I think Stephanie touched on this a little bit before about the student environment. What I would encourage us to do is to think about our meeting structures virtually. So how are we setting up our agendas to be effective? How are you recording the outcomes of your meetings to ensure that either your outcome was met or what the discussion was like? That will allow you to go back to a follow-up when we're back in the schools. And again, establishing those meeting structures will help you have a successful meeting. So those are just some tips for indirect service delivery, but a lot related to your multi-tier systems of support and any type of problem solving that you would want to do at the district or the school level. And I'll let Stephanie speak to the rest.
Thank you. As far as direct services, there's still a great opportunity here to expand what you might get the opportunity to do in the school setting. For people who are engaging already in counseling needs and direct services to students, again, it's a little bit about looking at, there's a lot of research to validate, therapeutic services through telehealth, as well as I think most people can picture what that would look like. They can see about really setting up the station at the school. They can, the station at the home, as well as, having those conversations. But I will refer back to what Karen mentioned about the confidentiality and really just looking at who else is in the environment and making sure that it's a situation where the student feels comfortable engaging. Also, if we're looking more at behavioral interventions or supporting behavioral needs, not only can we be working on interventions with the student, but it's also a great opportunity to engage with parents and to enlist parents who are most likely in the homes right now with their children during this time, and to really be talking to them about, what do they have going on at home and what are some of the things you might be able to support them in following through with some of the behavioral plans and them supporting the behaviors or the replacement behaviors that you're trying to work on. So it's a great time to engage parents as well, and they can be discussed through the same modality, whatever you're using to connect to your students. I also know that assessments are on everyone's mind, and as far as the US DOE guidance, I know we're going to talk about that soon here in our legal and ethical considerations. So I won't delve into that too much here, but I will say that I really love the comment that how long it takes to set up a telehealth practice and how much time and thoughtfulness really needs to go into looking at every situation, and especially when that comes to evaluations. I think it would behoove all of us to really look at what are the chances, what is the environment, what's the situation happening at the school, what is the thing that the student is either being, what if it's a triennial, what is the area of qualification, what are the presenting problems, what are the things you're looking at, and can those items be accurately assessed with the measures that we have out, or the processes, the tele-assessment platforms that do have some research backing, but is it appropriate for that student situation? Because everything that we should do online, even though we are in a bit of a crisis scenario right now, should be a thoughtful and well-planned experience, because we want to make sure that everything we do, really resonates and also is going to be appropriate for the long-term implications it has for those students.
Yeah, I think it's what you're talking about is certainly of critical importance from the standpoint of we have to always remember that we have to adhere to our validity and reliability responsibilities, as well as making sure that we don't do any harm in the practices that we deliver. And I know that the U.S. Department of Education guidance clearly identified that when a face-to-face interaction is required in order to maintain confidence in the outcomes of the results, such as in standardized testing, that during this time where that's not possible, that requirement does not have to be upheld. As soon as we are able to get back into business again with that, then we can fall back into that. But that leads us into talking a little bit more about some of the ethical and legal considerations. And I do want our listeners to know that we will have an additional webinar that will be dedicated to ethical and legal issues. And so we're going to only just touch on it briefly here. But Dan and Carrie, can you give us a feel for just what are some of the primary legal and ethical considerations to virtual practice?
Sure. Let me go ahead and talk about first, of course, informed consent, which we're used to giving all the time anyway for most of our services. But you do need to have a specific clause regarding telehealth because there are some unique factors regarding that. There's a lot of examples of telehealth used for counseling that are already out there that people can use as a basis for their own design. Though I would encourage you to work with your district on anything that you want people to sign. As far as signing those sorts of informed consents, there's a variety of electronic ways to do it. The old-fashioned way, of course, is printing out, scanning, and sending back, but we know that a lot of our parents aren't going to have those capabilities. So, but we'll address those a little bit more in the future webinar on informed consent. The overall thing, anytime you're involving technology, is in regards to confidentiality as outlaid in FERPA, and to a lesser degree in HIPAA, even though HIPAA does not apply to the school systems. We're in a very unique kind of period of time where none of us are in the schools, but we all work for the schools. And so what laws apply, and I think a lot of people are kind of using that as a back burner right now due to all of the increased emphasis on, of course, services. But to try to get into confidentiality, you want to try to have a private room where no other people are around, if possible, for the home services. Using headphones and a mic can create a more private environment. These are all idealized, and you just have to make your kind of cost-benefit analysis there. You know, now on crisis, they've suspended some of the issues that we would probably look at in more depth. But it's good to try to do the best you can initially, because if we continue to do some of these services, we want to have that in place and not have developed some bad habits. You want to make sure that you're practicing within your skills, and that includes trainings available in telehealth, and also becoming familiar with your platforms. Some are very straight ahead on the equivalent of using a Skype, and others are much more advanced. Typically, when you get into assessment platforms, you definitely want to do some training before you're going to go on and try to teach or use a student in a live situation. And that brings up, and I think we talked a little bit earlier about using this for appropriate populations. Their very young children may not be the best use for this particular platform, or how are you going to engage parents if they have to be a guide to refocus students of certain ages or various backgrounds or disorders that may require a little more attention. And you're only going to really be able to do that and be effective if they have comfort with using that technology. Sometimes we just automatically assume all kids are going to be comfortable with it, but that's not always true. And I think the final point in regards to ethics and these kind of broad kind of review is to not do any harm and try to do good. So in the end of the day, what's in the best interest of that child? And yes, it may not be ideal because, you know, the child's in a 2-bedroom apartment with 4 other children and their parents, but the best that we can do is making that contact versus not. And so I'm going to turn it over to Carrie to kind of elaborate on any other ethical issues. But know that we do have other resources available on the NASP website that are going to go into a lot more detail than we're doing today in this webinar.
Yeah, I really appreciate your commentary, Dan. I think that, you know, the term that I have heard over and over again is this term dynamic informed consent. This idea that it's almost like a flexible informed consent where you're having to change because you have to think about your own environment, but then also the environment in which the kid is in. It's things like, you know, if you hear a noise, ask them what the noise is, and kind of get yourself so that you're in that environment. The other thing I thought was, you know, do children have some behavioral triggers at home, you know, and if you are in that environment, does that sometimes increase those triggers? I love you brought up this point of really thinking about that support adult that's in the child's environment. When you think about things like trying to do intervention, the likelihood of you needing another individual that's right there with the kid is fairly high. And so is there a way that we can try to empower those people around the child in that environment? I think that could be really powerful. Hitting at a couple things about competence. I know that, again, this is kind of a new world for a lot of people. What's been really cool about this particular pandemic, it has afforded the opportunity for some other resources to be available to us. So I know that we're going to share on the NASP website some different things that are out know that for myself, I have spent a little time on the APA telehealth webinar, learning some of these things, how to create a telepresence, you know, how you should animate yourself by 10% more to be able to get your points across. The other place that I think it's through PESI, and they're also offering their telehealth, it's Telehealth Best Practices 101. I believe they're offering it for free with a code. It's TeleFree. Again, those are just some things to really build your own competence, just to understand the depth by which one should practice telehealth. And the other thing that I really wanted to just bring to your forefront really is that was provided by the Department of Education. I know that we're getting a lot of things in our emails right now, and so I think it's important to know which is really important. This one in particular came out in its U.S. Department of Ed guidance for IDEA service delivery. And you can see that in the guidance, they do a really nice job of highlighting that we want to do everything we can to try to provide some virtual service delivery if possible. But just echoing what Stacy said earlier, you know, if it's required face-to-face, we don't need to be doing that right now. We want to discourage that, especially if it is going to affect the standardization of that assessment process. I want to let you know, ask questions, guidance document on the NASP website that I think can be really, really important for people to take a look at, especially if you have some of those specific questions. Again, and then also the Office of Civil Rights has some really nice summary documents. And really the main themes is that we should really embrace the flexibility and being able to provide some services to kids that need us the most.
Great. Thank you so much, you guys, for that. Carrie, I know you've started diving into some of the resources that NASP has available, but can you all, both you and Hiro, share a little bit more about what kinds of resources are out there and how school psychologists can engage in them?
Yeah, and I appreciate this question. I think that one of the reasons I love associated with NASP is that there is such a plethora of resources. And what I've been so pleased about with this whole pandemic is that when we start to get into any sort of crisis, what's very cool to see is that people look to NASP and they say, what should we be doing for our kids? You know, what do we need to be doing for our professionals? And NASP responds. And so, first of all, I just want to really highlight the work that's being done by those NASP staff members who are really advocating for us all over Capitol Hill. I'm getting a lot of emails that are really highlighting some of those things that are moving forward. So I want to commend our very hardworking NASP staff members for doing that. One of the things that I wanted to bring to you as a resource, so not only was I a practitioner, but now I'm a trainer of school psychologists. And I know that we have a lot of practicum students and we have a lot of interns that are out there and they're wondering, you know, what am I going to do now? I'm like 3/4 of the way through my internship. You know, what are some things that we can do? And NASP also has guidance that they've released about how they need to finish their 1,200 hours of field supervised experience. What we are noticing and what we're really encouraging is work with your program, work with your university-based supervisors to really be creative in how you can still provide service. Can be, I'm thinking about what Hiro was talking about, you know, really still meeting with problem-solving teams, really maybe even creating some professional development for staff members to view. Also thinking about, you know, writing reports, making phone calls, maybe researching some creative service delivery planning. Again, we want to make sure that we're being creative and really empowering interns and practicum students to have a meaningful experience. It just might be more indirect. So that means that we can still meet the practice model domains. We can still give them really meaningful experiences. It just might mean that we might have to give them case study reviews. We might have to be doing some independent study and build competency in that. The other thing that we really wanted to highlight to you is to, again, think creatively. We know that not all kids have access to technology. And so, you know, we might have to be creative in how kids are receiving service. Now, I have heard from different school districts, you know, depending on your capabilities, that some are doing almost a drive-up distribution We actually had that in one of our local school districts where cars were just driving up and they were kind of giving it an eye through the window. So I've seen some of that. Now that's not necessarily possible in all school districts. I have seen that sometimes that the libraries will allow back out technology that you might be able to use, maybe even hotspots. The other thing that I've really noticed is that there are a lot of telecommunication systems recognizing what unique circumstance we're in right now, and they're really either offering lower rates services to be used for school. I think that there's just been some creative things, and I think that we want to make sure that we're doing that to access services for kids. I know that, you know, in South Dakota, if you get up to McIntosh, South Dakota, your cell phone doesn't work. You know, there's lots of things that no longer work. And so I think that for some cases, it might have to be things like packet work. You might have to be thinking about how can I empower that adult that's with the child to do kind of some direct service things so that we can help kids be able to get through this time. The other thing we want to think about, again, people outside of your school building, you know, there are a whole community of people who care about children, and so being sure that we really empower our memorandums of understanding and how can we make sure kids get services. And then there is such significant great resources at NASP, in particular about the COVID-19 crisis. If you click on their main page, there's a COVID-19 resources link. You click there, and then anything that they are updating, because this tends to change very quickly, and so anything that is updated is constantly there. And I wouldn't be surprised if it also lands in your email box if you are a NASP member. Hero, do you have anything else that you'd like us to think about?
Yeah, I think Carrie did a really great job of summarizing the different ways to utilize resources. Just a quick couple comments. There are a lot of different associations that are offering free webinars and free services right now. Most recently, the Reading League had offered a webinar by Dr. Moats and Dr. Spear-Swerling, and those are like big wigs in our reading world. So look out for things like that. A lot of folks are doing that. And I also wanted to share that if you've been looking to buy a book, Guilford just emailed today with a 20% discount. So I think organizations are recognizing that folks who want to self-study or increase their professional learning at this time should have access to those items. And lastly, as school psychologists, we're interested in translating research to practice. So reach out to researchers that you're interested in their articles, or if you're interested in an initiative that you heard at convention or another online learning that you were part of. I can tell you that 100% of the time, they will send the article back to you in full text. So I also saw several journals have opened up their paywall. I know it's always annoying to click on that, and then you pay $39 to get a publication. So look out for those types of things. Several folks are opening that up. So those are the only other things I'd add. And I just want to put in another plug. I think NASP had shared that the Online Learning Center had some the professional learning on that is available as well. So utilize this time to kind of build your own capacity. And another great way to build that too is to join some NASP communities that you might be interested in your area of expertise or an area that you want to learn more about. So those are some resources and some tips to get those articles that you might have been looking for.
Thank you, you guys. That was terrific. So there's a few steps to success we think will be helpful for you. First, step one, consider your virtual environment. Step two, communicate with others to plan and respond to student needs. Step three, consider the breadth of services that you can provide. Step four, consider legal and ethical issues. Try and use an ethical decision-making model if you can. And step five, embrace people as resources and NASP as resources. We're here for you, and we're all in this together, so let's work together to make it happen. Our key messages for today are that first, that you should let the NASP practice model be your guide. The breadth of services that you can provide through the practice model are the same range of services you can do through telehealth. You just have to think creatively and really work to empower your knowledge in the delivery of these services. Secondly, this is an opportunity for you to demonstrate your value beyond what people already know about you. So get in there and try some new things and become a problem solver for your schools. Thirdly, be thoughtful about your virtual environment. Remember the kids' environment when you're working with them, as well as the environment you are delivering your services from, and do your best to try and make those environments be the most conducive for learning as possible. Fourth, technology offers a lot of ways you can connect with your colleagues, with your school administrators, with your parents and your kids. Reach out and touch somebody. Next, prioritize student needs. Weigh your risks and benefits of services. Consider the fact that compensatory services will likely be offered at the end of this experience for many kids. So make sure you document your services as you go along so that we know what's been provided, what hasn't been provided, what still needs to be provided, and we can make good plans in the future. Be sure and communicate and coordinate regularly with your colleagues, with your teachers, and with your parents, and with your students. This is a terrific time to engage families in planning for kids and being a real resource for them as well. Use a legal and ethical decision-making model to guide your work. And again, please join us for the upcoming webinar on that issue. Consider your skills and seek out related professional development as needed. Utilize NASP and external resources in supporting your work and the work of your school community. And lastly, for all of you internship and practicum students, we want you to keep working with us. Please coordinate with your graduate educators and your site supervisors so that you can stay engaged with the students and our students can stay engaged with you. We do have a variety of resources linked to this webinar. This webinar in print form will be available on the NASP website so that you can just click on the links and download the resources that you're interested in. But first and foremost, head to the NASP Health Crisis resource page, as it has everything that you'll see here plus more. And as new things come out, they will also be posted there. Some external resources that might be helpful to you. The APA offers a checklist for setting up telepsych services that could be very helpful. There are also some additional continuing ed resources that are available through them. The American School Counseling Association has put together some guidance for doing distance learning with school counseling. It is very important that we reach out and we work with our school counseling peers to coordinate our services, and seeing what they're being told by their national association would be really helpful too. Presence Learning, Stephanie actually is the author of the Presence Learning white paper on remote administration of psychoeducational assessments. This is terrific guidance for you as we navigate this new area to sort of see what you can and can't do in regards to telehealth and what the setting needs to look like, and some of the strong considerations for virtual delivery of services. And so I encourage you to look at that white paper and see what Presence Learning has to offer in that regard. Also, the U.S. Department of Education, as well as the U.S. Office of Civil Rights and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Centers for Disease Control have all released guidance around COVID-19 resources for school employees and for parents and for families and communities. And I just encourage you to really mine those resources. I know today another set of resources came out through the Centers for Disease Control that are all for parents on just really what the heck can you be doing with your kids at home. And I know so many parents that will be interested in seeing those resources. And if we can help get these things out to our families of the kids that we're working with, I know it will, again, enhance our value and help make those connections for them. So I just want to take a couple final moments and just thank all of our experts for participating today. I do want to remind you that if you have questions or comments and you'd like to continue this dialogue, we invite you to go to the NASP Member Exchange and to join the discussion thread that corresponds to this webinar. Please stay safe and be healthy, and thank you for all of your work you're doing with kids and your families. Thank you very much for joining us for this webinar.
Yeah, thank you.